We are back remaking more skins. Last time we got as far as this skin, so today I'll remake the next 4 skins. In order, we're not skipping any if you're wondering that because you saw the last part. I've explained everything I need to explain, let's move straight on with the video. So first up in this video we have the remake of the skin for Dion Panic. Now, Panic is a song that very much resides at the upper end, not only of EDM, but it's actually pretty intense for dubstep as a whole. And dubstep on average is quite intense, so when you hear that this is hard even by dubstep standards, you know you're getting into something serious. Now, this song isn't the most intense song I have ever heard. It still isn't quite at the level of like some trap songs, I guess. And also dubstep, like it wouldn't be as intense as like Excision, but it does kind of sound a little reminiscent of that, and that's because Dion actually was like trained by Excision for a little bit. But anyway, this skin was the first skin that I ever made that really took on a dystopian or cyberpunk or apocalypse theme. I know I kind of touched upon that with the rebellious style of the hard dance and dubstep Monster Cat genre skins, but really this is like my first main skin that wasn't in that series that really focused in on the dystopian theme. And that's represented in the cover art for this song. It's a picture of a storm over a big city, like in the future. And the cover art heavily features pink and purple and in like varying degrees of lightness and darkness. So that's why those colors are so prevalent on this skin, is because like any skin, I make it to represent the cover art. So I'm doing that here. But even though this skin was new, or like the theme of this skin was quite new at the time that I was doing it, it really wasn't anything particularly strange that I had to deal with in this skin. Like apart from the mask, everything was basically stuff I'd already done before. And I mean the mask was also something that I'd done before as well with the Monster Cat genre skins that I mentioned previously already. But like there wasn't really anything here that held me back for that long, other than I guess maybe the front hair, but even that really wasn't that bad. I mean, you see that coming together now. Doing the back and sides and the top of the hair is the same kind of deal as always, and then, you know, doing the arms and the legs is the same kind of deal as always. So it's not too long until I get towards the end. Just need to do some details on the outer layer, like on the arms, and do the strings on the hoodie. And then after that I'll go and do the outer layer of the shoes right there. And then once that's finished, I am finished the skin. Next up we have what is basically the complete opposite type of skin to the previous. And this is the remake of the skin inspired by Right Now by Maazel or Maazel or Maazel or however you actually pronounce that name. I think it's Maazel because there are 2 A's, so like it's very unlikely to be Maazel, and if it was Maazel there would probably be like an LLE. But anyway, this skin, when I made it originally, I wouldn't quite describe it as pastel, but it was unusually light and desaturated for the time. Like this was back when I was making skins with the saturation and value often right up at 100%. So when I did this one back in the day, I dropped the saturation and value by quite a bit, and there was definitely a difference in the perception of the skin. This was around the time that It's Cherry Bai, if you remember her, she actually isn't active on Skindex anymore, hasn't been for many months, but she was actually my first follower, and she told me that I should try making my skins a little lighter colored. So before she gave me that advice, I already had that skin in the works. But it was really good timing, therefore, when she told me that I was doing well. because then I released that skin, and that was kind of what told me, hey, sometimes you should not have the saturation and value at the max. Now, this skin, although remaking it wasn't like the worst kind of deal in the world, it definitely took me quite a while to remake it. It actually took me about 40 minutes in total. And the craziest thing about all of that is that this skin isn't really as bad as the other skins that took me 40 minutes. I mean, yeah, of course, I just said this skin wasn't that bad. But like, I kept taking extra long on the kind of things that shouldn't take me that long. And then there was the flower crown. Now, it doesn't look that complicated, but let me tell you, doing that flower crown was definitely not the most fun experience in the world. I kept having to figure out where I wanted the flowers to go, and then I wanted to know like where the leaves would poke out. That took a bit of figuring out. And then the shading itself wasn't really that big of a deal, but then the outer layer on that flower crown was pretty much a nightmare. I was cross-referencing with the skin that I made for Nothing More, which is by another artist whose name begins with M-A-Z, and I can't actually pronounce it. Is it Mazer? I don't know. Bowtied Media says Mazer, but I'm thinking Mazzare because his name, not his name, but he is Italian. I'm not sure if that's the best logic to go by, but I think Mazzare just sounds better anyway. So doing the flower crown, that took quite a long time, but even the other parts, while they were easy enough, they also took up quite a bit of time. The hair on this, though, was unusually simple. I mean, it's literally symmetrical. I pretty much never make the front hair symmetrical. So that's one thing to note. And I just have the very typical front hair shading. But then we finally move on to shading the flower crown, which, as I mentioned previously, wasn't really the tough part. But then after that, I had to figure out, okay, do I want part of the flower to be on the outer layer? Do I want all the flowers to be on the outer layer? I cross-referenced with the skin for Nothing More, and it showed that all the flowers were on the outer layer. So I was almost about to go with that, but that meant removing the flowers from the front hair as well, which I tried that out briefly, but then I was like, no, it's not really worth doing this. So I just undid that and then called the skin finished at that point. But I think it still turned out very well. With right now out of the way, we move on to the remake of the skin for World Triumph. Now, Triumph is a future-based song that came out in 2014. So while that genre wasn't exactly underground by then, it had yet to really become super popular to the extent that it was in 2015. And, it wasn't the biggest genre on the label at the time. That was Electro House. But even at this point, there were a lot of gems coming out in that genre. So you have Triumph, which is pretty good. But then you also have masterpieces like Kaleidoscope by Casbo, which I still think to this day that is one of the best future-based songs ever. But then there's also World's other releases around this time, so that includes stuff like Orbit and his remix of Astronaut Champions, all of which are great. Now, this skin took me nearly as long as the last one, and the thing is, last one I kinda had an excuse, but in this one, the reason why it took me so long is genuinely pathetic. Like, I am not hesitating to admit that the reason this took long time is pathetic. And that's that I spent an unbelievable amount of time trying to figure out not just the shading on the front hair, but actually what its shape itself should be. So even though, like, doing the rest of the skin, so doing the greens and doing the skin and doing the white is fine, once I move on to this kind of orangish beige color, things start to go downhill. So I start shading it, and then I notice things look a little too saturated. But then I think, okay, maybe that will fix itself once I move on to the lighter tones. And it does to an extent, but really not enough. So I end up going back over that to desaturate it all. But before I do that, I move on to this bit of the front hair, and you will literally see me, alright? In here I probably spent about 30 seconds figuring out what I want it to look like. But this is sped up to 8 times the real-time speed. So 30 seconds times 8 is 4 minutes. So like you could basically say I was 5 minutes just picking out what shape I wanted that hair to be. But once things were sorted out there, doing the rest is fine. So you see me now changing the hair color to look desaturated. When I start off with that desaturation, it always looks weird at first, just doing the lightest shades, but then when I apply it to all the other tones, things start to come together and it starts to look a lot better. And you can definitely see the difference coming up now as I move on to desaturating the shorts to the same extent. Because that's just the thing I do with my skins in general, is that I will match colors a lot. And it's quite common for me to do shorts and hair as the same color. One other thing to note on this skin, speaking of shorts, is the belt. It looks kind of dark here, but I end up lightening it off camera. So you'll see that in the side-by-side comparison. But apart from that, really, there's not really anything else to note about this. We just finish up the outer details and there we go. Now the last skin in this video also has its own little trick up its sleeve. This skin is the remake of the skin for Bad Computer New Dawn. Now you're probably looking at this and you're thinking, wait, what trick could this be? This just looks like a relatively simple adventurous or like explorer type skin. What's going on here? Well, you look over at that shirt and you think, okay, that's just a white shirt, so surely it's not going to be complicated, right? Except that's just white temporarily, and I'm going to come back to it and turn it into a sort of sunset or sunrise gradient. And that's a thing both in the title of the song, which is New Dawn, but it's also actually on the cover art. So you have the cliff at the bottom, that is the brown color, so that's in the jacket and the boots. And then you have the grayish blue color clouds behind that, which is the color of the pants and the eyes. And then I made the skin blonde because I just thought that would look good. And also because I hadn't really been doing enough blonde skins. So I decided to make this one blonde to give it some variety. That was way back. I'm not talking about now specifically, but like back when I made the original. But yeah, most of the details of the skin, as usual, aren't really anything to get worked up about. The front hair though does hold me back a little bit. The first thing is figuring out how I want the shadow cast by the front hair on the forehead, because I don't use that shape that often. So I don't really have like a default forehead shading for when I use that front hair. But the other thing was actually shading that front hair itself also took quite a bit of time. But doing the front, not the front, the top, back and sides of the hair, as I mentioned in most of my other skins, let's be honest, doesn't take too long at all. And you know, shading most parts of the skin is fine. So like shading the boots is fine, the pants is fine, shading the jacket is fine. All that is fine really. The only issue is doing the front hair on this one. You'll see in a little bit, I do go back and forth quite a few times, like I did with Triumph, but this one's honestly worse, because after trying doing that horizontal shading, for quite a few attempts, I give up temporarily and decide to go and do everything else. So I do the outer layer of the boots and the jacket, and I shade any parts I've left to shade, so that includes the eyes and the eyebrows. But then I go back to doing the front hair, and I end up just settling for like a very simple vertical shading pattern. So now we can finally move on to the sunset or sunrise gradient on the t-shirt, and it's not really, it didn't take me that long to do it, but you know, I did have to change my mind quite a few times before I finally got something I really liked. But once I did, things came together very quickly, and I think I ended up with something that looked quite good, if I do say so myself. Kind of looks a bit like the Airways flag upside down, but apart from that, I think it turned out well. Not even a need to shade it, because there wouldn't be any horizontal shading, just vertical. As you see there, it actually makes it look worse. We're finished the skins, so it's now time for the usual side-by-side comparison of old and new. Next time, I'll remake the next 4 skins and start getting close to the finish line. If that sounds good, then hit the subscribe button on your left and turn on notifications by hitting the bell. And if you like this video, then be sure to hit the like button down below. Thanks for watching, and have a good night or day.